My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm the proud co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett. Take it away, Cara and Vanessa.
Charlene, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to the Parent Venture for having us. We've been so looking forward to this event. I am now going to share my screen, and we're going to trade off talking for about the next 45 minutes. We can't see the Q&A while we speak, so the questions will get covered at the end. And put them in so you don't forget, because if you're anything like me, you have a question and then 10 seconds later you forget it. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So the goal of tonight is to know more and cringe less. We hope you leave this evening feeling more empowered, with more information and more confidence to care for the kids in your life going through puberty and adolescence.
In order to do that, we have a plan. And so here's what you're going to hear this evening. We're going to start with teaching you how to leave your own puberty baggage at the door, because, spoiler alert, this is not your puberty. Then we're going to help you redefine what the term puberty really means and how it has changed over the past few decades. We'll update data, and for some people, you may be surprised with what you hear. And then maybe most importantly, we're going to land with very concrete suggestions and ways into conversation, because this talk should be the beginning of a whole host of new conversations with the kids in your lives.
So what does it mean to leave your baggage at the door? As Cara mentioned, this is their puberty, not ours, except our memories from puberty are literally seared into our brains. If everyone here closes their eyes and thinks back to 6th grade, you can still viscerally feel that moment in the hallway at school or in the lunchroom, and it feels like you're transported back to that moment. And that makes a lot of sense. There's all sorts of neurological data as to why those memories are so ingrained in our minds. But our kids don't need to carry our memories on top of their own experiences, because this journey through puberty and adolescence, it's not an easy one. It's not straight and it's not simple. It's uphill and it's winding, and they're already carrying a lot. And so they don't need our baggage on top of their baggage. But we still have these stories we want to share. So our advice is to actually find your own trusted adult. We tell our kids all the time, find a trusted adult, but we need trusted adults to share those stories with and to kind of laugh or cry or whatever it is. People ask all the time, but what stories can I share with my kids? And here's our advice. If you have a story that's funny, that shows your fallibility and your silliness when you were a kid, share that story. And if you have a story that shows your resilience, that shows your ability to move through a difficult situation and come out the other side a little stronger, that's a good story to share as well.
Okay, so now that you've left your puberty at the door, here we go into a walk through the most modern version of the word puberty. And this story begins in post-World War II London. It's actually a town just outside of London called Harpenden. In Harpenden, there was an orphanage. And there were kids who were orphaned due to the war, and they were well taken care of, but they were a collected group, and it was very easy to study them. So there was a local doctor, a guy named James Tanner, and he decided he wanted to look at a bunch of things with these kids, one of them being, when were they entering puberty? No one had looked at the starting point of normal puberty. So he did that. He started a study that actually stretched out over 3 decades. He started in the late 40s, went all the way through to the late 60s. And every 3 months, he took pictures of all of the kids who lived in this orphanage. And he was looking for 3 things. He was looking for breast development, he was looking for penile and testicular growth, and he was looking for hair growth. The reason he was looking for those three things, well, they're outward markers of puberty, but they're also things that you can measure with a photograph. He didn't examine the kids and he wasn't doing histories. He was just looking at pictures. What did he find? He found that the average age for a girl to enter puberty was 11. And what that meant in his book was that she was starting to bud breasts. The average age for a boy to enter puberty was 11 and a half. And so all the way through when I went to medical school in the early 90s, the Tanner stages, as they became known, were the way we measured and marked puberty, and the onset of puberty was always defined as 11 for girls and 11 and a half for boys. And of course, there was some variation on either side, but that was what was considered typical. I should explain the Tanner stages. There are 5 of them. 1 means you're not in puberty, nothing is happening. 5 means you're fully adult, you're done. And 2, 3, and 4 mark the path through puberty. In 1997, a nurse practitioner named Marcia Herman Giddens was working in North Carolina, published the results of a study. She started the study in the early 90s because the girls coming into her clinic were in puberty. They had breast tissue, they were starting to develop sexually, and they were much younger than 11. And she said, I just need to figure out, is this a real phenomenon? Is it a local phenomenon? Is there something going on? So she reached out to the American Academy of Pediatrics. They partnered with her. She led a study of 17,000 girls. Now, unlike Tanner, she did examine these kids, and also all the pediatricians across the country who enrolled in the study examined the kids, and they looked at all different metrics. But what she found, and it was considered a very fair comparison, is that puberty was marching backwards, that things like breast budding were happening a year earlier. So in April of 1997, Herman Giddens published her data. There were headlines everywhere. We had a girl problem. Girls were going into puberty sooner than they ever had. And the follow-along thought was that then we had a sexualization problem. So what do I mean by that? Well, when bodies change and they become physically, they move from young female bodies into more womanly bodies, those kids end up being sexualized. And what she was able to identify was the beginning of a sexualization issue of increasingly younger girls. Fast forward to 2005, it's a group of endocrinologists, those are hormone doctors. They were scattered all over the country, and they decided they wanted to see if Herman Giddens' data held up. That's what researchers do. And so this group, including one pediatric endocrinologist, a woman named Louise Greenspan, they studied a bunch of girls across the country between 2005 and 2010. And what did they find? They found that not only was Herman Giddens right, that puberty was happening earlier than ever before, but in fact, puberty was happening even earlier. Louise and her colleagues say that based on their data, puberty starts between 8 and 9 for the average girl, and between 9 and 10 for the average boy. Between 8 and 9 for the average girl. We haven't gotten to boys yet. And they said that if you break kids down by ethnicity, by racial group, if you were Black, you were first to puberty. Now, a couple of caveats here. The first is all of the puberty researchers up until now have really only looked at 3 racial groupings. They looked at, and the language is all over the place because these studies crossed a bunch of different decades, but they looked at Caucasian or white kids, they looked at Hispanic or Latina kids, and they looked at Black or African-American kids, depending upon the language that the study used. You can see that these were not fully representative data. They did not look at all kids across society, and that's being remedied now. But one group that they did not look at was boys. And so in 2012, Marcia Herman Giddens, who had been retired and she was gardening and she was having a great life, pulled herself out of retirement, studied 4,000 boys, published data showing that in fact, boys too were going into puberty earlier, that they were entering puberty between ages 9 and 10. And now we had this body of evidence that in fact, puberty was happening earlier than ever before, and it was definitive. Now, all of these researchers over the years were really defining some physiologic phenomena that are important to understand. So we're not going to do a lot of biology and physiology in this talk, but we're going to teach you about hormone loops because it will help you understand what is happening to the tweens and teens in your life. So in order for puberty to begin, the brain has to release two hormones, LH and FSH. It does not matter what your gender is, those two hormones get released from the pituitary gland, and that marks the beginning of puberty. Why? Because those two hormones then travel down to their target organs. If you have ovaries, that's where LH and FSH go. If you have testicles, that's where LH and FSH go. And depending upon which of those organs you have, those organs produce their own hormones. So ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and testicles produce testosterone. It is a loop of highs and lows, the brain releasing LH and FSH, the testicles or the ovaries responding by releasing their hormones. Those hormones, either estrogen and progesterone or testosterone, then dropping off slowly because the brain is signaled, we've got plenty around here, we don't need any more. And they drop to a certain point and the brain says, wait, we need more. And the brain surges again, LH and FSH surge again, and the testicles or the ovaries start to produce their hormones again. There is nothing slow and linear about the way hormones are released during the years of puberty. In fact, it is quite chaotic. One last moment of puberty history before I pass the baton to Vanessa. Over the decades between when Tanner did his research and then Herman Giddens and Greenspan and Herman Giddens again did theirs, one thing was really important to note. Puberty was not happening faster. So one would assume that if you start puberty earlier, you would get through it faster. But in fact, what Herman Giddens and Greenspan and so many others have found subsequently is that puberty is stretching like taffy. It is starting about 3 years earlier than it used to a generation or two ago, but it is taking just as long to complete. And how do we know that? Because people like Louise Greenspan have gone on to study first periods. And first periods don't happen at the beginning of puberty. They don't happen at the end. They happen somewhere in the middle. And they really haven't budged very much at all over the past several decades. Maybe they happen about 3 months sooner than they used to, but it's nothing like the 3-year shift between Tanner's start of puberty, somewhere around 11 or 11 and a half, and today's start of puberty that ranges between 8 and 10.
So just a refresher for those of you who may not know or remember, there's all sorts of physical changes that happen during puberty, right? Cara talked about breast development, which actually can happen in all kids. About 50% of boys have some breast budding or breast development during puberty. It normally reconciles over time, and then females have breast development over that long stretch of time. Penile and testicular growth. And what's important to know about that, and some of you might have been really shocked to hear the average age of onset of puberty for boys is between 9 and 10, because for a year or two, the only sign of puberty is penile and testicular growth. And it's just when boys are getting private. So their caregivers, their parents, often don't see anything happening. And they look just like themselves, except what you might not be seeing is penile and testicular growth. It happens slowly and it often happens privately. Whereas breast buds poke out of basically everything you wear. Like you could wear a down coat and they would stick out. Then there's a bunch of physical changes that happen in not really any particular order. They don't start at a designated moment. They don't end at a designated moment. They don't always happen before or after each other. And so we've got Mr. Messy in the corner to remind us that a lot of this is kind of a big mess. Those of you already caring for kids in puberty might know that for personal experience. So the other things that happen are, as Cara mentioned, periods, right? Those are a middle marker, not a beginning marker of puberty, not an end marker of puberty. Erections and wet dreams or nocturnal emissions, right? Those are erections happen with people with penises all the way from infants or toddlers. But the difference is that in puberty, they can be more frequent. And certainly younger kids who are not in puberty do not have wet dreams, cannot ejaculate semen. So that's something to keep in mind when you think, oh, well, they've always had erections. This is new. Growth spurts. So kids have different kinds of growth spurts. In our society, we often have like the growth spurt of they just shoot up, right? It's the duckling to the swan, but actually growth spurts look really different. Some kids gain more weight than normal before they grow any height. Some kids gain a lot of height and not much weight at all. Some kids' body shapes change dramatically, a lot more curves, a lot more musculature, and other kids still stay pretty straight. They just get bigger. So, one important note that we like to make, and we have a whole chapter about this in the book, is that changing bodies, it's a complicated moment for kids. It's also a complicated moment for the people caring for them. And we just like to remind people that gaining more weight than usual is normal. And the kids who don't gain much weight at all and gain really tall, even if you might be envious of them for being so thin, don't assume they're feeling so great about that. So just keep that in mind and be careful about what you say about a growing kid's body. And then the last thing is voice drops. And actually, this happens to people of all genders. It's just more marked in male bodies. So you might be looking at this list wondering, why aren't certain things on here, right? You might be wondering why there's nothing about acne or body odor or hair growth. And while culturally we think of those things as part of puberty, and in a sort of expansive definition, we would include it, those are actually part of a process called adrenarche. So, Cara talked about testosterone and estrogen, but if you look at our gentleman on the left-hand side of the screen, he has his kidneys, and on top of his kidneys are little yellow triangles, and those are his adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands release a lot of different hormones, including cortisol, the stress hormone, but they also release the adrenal androgens known as DHEA and DHEAS. And those hormones have the dignified job of telling the body to grow hair in new places, to grow thicker, darker hair in places where it already existed, right? So the new hair might be pubic hair, underarm hair, facial hair, thicker, darker hair might be on the legs or on the arms. These hormones also tell the body to produce the sebaceous glands in our pores to produce thicker, oilier sweat. And that causes two things to occur. One, it can cause acne because thicker sweat is more likely to clog the pores of the skin. And hold on to your hats, you're going to enjoy this one. When you get off this Zoom tonight, you can use this very piece of information with the kids in your house. That thicker sweat, as Cara likes to say, is like a feast for the bacteria that lives on our skin. And that's normal. That's the microbiome of the skin. It's healthy, it's normal. But all of a sudden, the bacteria has a new buffet available and they eat that oilier sweat and then they fart it out. So the body odor or the foot stink you're smelling in your house, that is bacteria off-gassing. And you might be wondering, well, what do I do about it? You encourage your kid to actually use soap in the shower instead of just letting the water run over their bodies, and make sure they actually use soap under their arms or on their feet, because that will really help with the smell. And the reason we talk so specifically about adrenarche is because it's coincidental often to puberty, like it happens around the same time, but not always. And so sometimes a kid will grow body hair, pubic hair, underarm hair at like 6, and parents get really worried because they're concerned their child is in puberty, but it may just be adrenarche and not puberty itself.
I love how Vanessa describes the dignified job of the adrenal glands. So we're gonna wrap the description of how puberty has shifted into the modern day with this little 4-bulleted slide that covers way too much. It sets the stage for a conversation that will follow with very specific examples. But as you can see, puberty has expanded. It starts earlier, it lasts longer, and it happens with a cell phone in hand. The stretch timeline means that puberty and adolescence overlap. We used to use those words very separately. We don't anymore. And in fact, puberty used to have a very narrow meaning. Puberty used to only refer to the physical changes that would get a body from being reproductively immature, could not participate in making a baby, to reproductively mature, had the ability to participate in making a baby. This is really no longer the appropriate definition of puberty. In addition to puberty beginning earlier, puberty really needs to be seen as all of the downstream impacts of those same hormones that make the body change. The mood swings, the friendships, the dynamics in a family, the drama. And so there's this Venn diagram overlap of puberty and adolescence that's really profound. There's also no gender to puberty. This is not a girl-only conversation. And Vanessa and I celebrate the shift that has happened in the girl world in terms of talking about a lot of these issues more openly. But we're big believers that this shift should occur in all communities, that everyone goes through puberty. It's a universal stage of life. And so the conversation should include everyone. Puberty is deeply impacted by outside forces. And I can't, this would be a whole other hour to talk about many of the challenges that cause stress on the body and shift the way various hormones work, whether it's cortisol, the stress hormone that Vanessa just talked about, or the actual sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. But we have everything from climate change and war and economic instability to endocrine disruptors and variables that directly impact the hormonal balance in our bodies. And all of that is shifting the landscape of puberty. But maybe most importantly, hopefully you now understand that this data and the definitions have evolved and they will continue to evolve. So this is a changing landscape. This is where we are today. We've given you a snapshot, 2024. But there will be more data out in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, and we may be marking puberty in slightly different ways or acknowledging that it's happening maybe even earlier. We saw a little blip of that in COVID, but it looked like a blip and the data has kind of come back. So with that, Vanessa, let's get into some nitty-gritty and start giving people some examples of how puberty impacts the body and the brain and what they can do about it.
So we're going to cover 3 specific topics. And the first one is mood swings, because it is the #1 question we get from parents. How do I handle my kids' mood swings? So Cara's going to talk quickly about what's happening inside the body and brain to cause mood swings. And then I'm going to talk about how do you handle it.
So the hormonal stuff's really easy here. As you know, there's an on-off switch in the brain. The LH and FSH are released. They go to the ovaries or testicles. They tell those organs to release their hormones. And once those organs release their hormones and there's enough estrogen or there's enough testosterone, the brain's work is done and it turns the off switch and it doesn't produce any more LH and FSH. So those levels go down. And then testosterone and estrogen go down until the body turns the switch on again. And so this is what leads to this roller coaster of hormonal surges. And that roller coaster doesn't just happen below the neck. Those same hormones circulate in and around the brain, and they change the way neurons fire and neurons wire. They change the way kids feel and the way they express their moods.
So how do we handle it? Right? You got a kid, a tornado coming in hot, right? Throws the backpack on the floor, starts screaming in your face. stomps out of the room and you're like, oh, thank God. And then they come back and they start screaming in your face again. And you're just like, oh my God, what am I going to do here? So a few don'ts, and we don't go negative, but we're going to go a little bit negative just for a second. So what don't we do? We don't tell them to calm down, because no one in the history of the world has ever calmed down because someone told them to calm down. If they're crying, we don't tell them to stop crying, because again, it doesn't work. Another thing is, we don't tell them to stop being so dramatic, because it may not seem like a big deal to us, but it feels like a really big deal to them, and we don't want to diminish that or invalidate it. And even though in our minds we're like, oh, they got to breathe, we got to get them to breathe. If you say to a 13-year-old, honey, take a deep breath, what are they going to say to you? I don't want to take a deep breath. Don't tell me to take a deep breath. So instead, we're going to take a deep breath. And once we've taken a deep breath and helped to self-regulate, we might also be able to help co-regulate the kid and get them to breathe, or at least take a moment. The other thing to remember is, we don't want to engage in the particular issue, because that's only going to keep them at a 10. And our goal is to hopefully bring them down to a 5 or a 6. So we want to pivot. We want to redirect them, just like we did when they were toddlers. So we might say something like, oh, let's get a glass of water. I'm so thirsty, I haven't had any water all day. Or I got to take the dog for a walk. Come with me. Or I tried this in my house. It never works, but maybe it'll work in your house. I'll say to my kids, do you want to braid my hair? Of course, they're like, no, but it helps them take a moment. It distracts them. Maybe it even makes them laugh a little bit. And sometimes we don't have to say anything. Sometimes we can just sit next to them and let them just get it all out, and be a receiver or be witness to what's happening without solving or fixing or getting involved. And if you can't help yourself and you have to say something, I'm one of those people, I acknowledge it openly, then just validate. So if a kid comes home just railing against the injustice of having failed a Spanish test, and in your head, you're like, dude, if you had studied for that Spanish test, you would not have failed it. But you're not relitigating in this moment. You are just sitting and listening and giving empathetic murmurs like, oh, I'm so sorry. Ugh, that sounds really hard. Or Lisa DeMore likes to say that stinks, but Lisa's from Cleveland and she's much more refined than I am. So I say, ugh, that sucks. But you'll find the words that feel authentic to you, that are empathic and validate their experience. And the last thing to remember, and this might be one of the most important things we talk about tonight, when you mess up, because you will mess up many, many, many times. I mess up every single day, and this is what I do for a living. When you mess up, you take a do-over. And the do-over can happen 30 seconds later, it can happen 3 hours later, it can happen 3 days later. And what you do is you own your mistake, and you say something like, hey, you know what? I am so sorry. You came to me and you were really upset and you needed me to listen, and I blew it. I messed up. I started fixing, or I started shouting, or I wasn't listening. Can I get another chance? Can I try it again? And doing that teaches our kids 2 things. One, it teaches them that we are fallible and we own our mistakes, and there's nothing a kid loves more than when an adult admits to messing up. And 2, it shows them that no matter what, there is always a way back. You're asking them for a way back. Hey, can you help me? Can you give me another chance? And it also tells them that when they need a way back, when they are sitting at the bottom of a well and they feel hopeless and alone, we will throw them a ladder and help them up and get them through that mood and away from the feelings that they're having and on to the next experience.
Those emojis are so validating. They're amazing. How do you know if it's just a mood swing? This is a question we get all the time. And the reason why is that we are in a mental health emergency right now. And these are very, very important questions. The short answer is you don't always know. The longer answer is that because you now understand the physiology of what's happening during puberty with hormones going up and down and up and down, you will appreciate that those hormonal surges happen on an hourly basis. We're not talking about testosterone or estrogen surging for 2 weeks and then coming crashing down. It might be for 2 or 3 hours. And so that seems to be a good indicator, not always, but often, of whether a mood swing is a hormonal mood swing or there's something else going on. Here are some other things that you can look at with a few caveats. So the first is looking at mood duration. Most of the definitions of things like depression or anxiety ask for symptoms to last at least 2 weeks. Anyone who has had a child who's struggling with a mental health issue in their home knows that 2 weeks is a very long time. So no one will ever tell you you have to wait 2 weeks, but just so you understand the diagnostic, the clinical definition is usually 2 weeks or longer. Changes in appetite, these can go in any direction. Kids can lose their appetite or gain a much larger appetite when they're managing mental health issues. But kids in puberty, especially in the middle of a growth spurt, those kids might eat you out of house and home. And so it can be very hard to distinguish. Sleep patterns too, they can go different directions when you're struggling with mental health. Kids can have trouble sleeping, falling asleep, staying asleep, or they can have trouble getting up. They don't want to get out of bed. They're sleeping hours and hours and hours. One of the key things you can look for is, do they not want to face their day? And if you're answering yes to that question, you're getting help for that kid. The last thing is looking at changes in friendships. These are par for the course through the adolescent years. Do not kid yourself that it's not going to happen to the kids in your life. It will, by definition. But that said, they need one. Kids need at least one. And frankly, some kids only need one. So if you start to see your child or a child in your life lose connection with the kids that are important to them, and they don't have the ability to bring in one new one, that may be a child who needs some help.
Another big topic we get asked about is decision making, or lack thereof. And it can be really frustrating because I'll give you an example. You're sitting at the table, you're having dinner with your kid, you're feeling really connected to them, and you say to them, you decide this is a moment to have a big conversation. You say, hey, what would you do if someone offered you a vape? And your kid looks at you and says, I would say, absolutely not. And then I would text you to come pick me up immediately. And then together, when I get home, we'll read the latest New York Times article about the dangers of vaping. And the next day, I'm going to walk into class and I'm going to start the anti-vaping club in school. And you're like, yes, I am winning at this parent thing. I'm doing everything right. This is awesome. And then 2 hours later, you get a text from your best friend who tells you that she saw your kid on a street corner vaping with a bunch of other kids. And you're like, what happened? How did this happen? They told me all the right things at the table. And then they turned around and did the complete opposite. I just want to reassure you, for those of you who this happened to today or this week or this month, certainly happened in my house, not the vaping, but other stuff. You are not raising a sociopath. Your kid is not a sneak or a bad human being. They are a work in progress. And Cara is going to explain exactly what's happening in their brains so that you have some reassurance that this is actually kind of normal.
All right, so 60 seconds on brain maturation. So the brain matures in 2 ways. One is called pruning, which basically means you're born with too many neurons. You grow even more neurons in the first couple of years of life. And then for the majority of the rest of your life, with a couple of exceptions, you just shrink them down. You're pruning a tree. You're getting rid of the neurons you don't use. And that's one form of maturation. But the more important form of maturation at this moment during puberty is something called myelination. So myelin is the fat cells that line the outside of a neuron. When we're born, most of the neurons in our brain are naked. They're like naked wires. But when covered with myelin, they're insulated. They're like a cell phone charger, right? There's a wire in there, but there's a white plastic coating outside. And the beauty of being insulated is you can send a signal faster and more efficiently. Myelin lays itself down cell by cell by cell. This is the famous, you've heard it, that it takes 25 to 30 years for a brain to mature. It's that it takes 25 to 30 years for myelin to be laid down in the brain and for those quick connections to be established. And myelin lays itself down in a very specific order. It goes from the bottom to the top, and it goes from the inside out. Where is their brain on this path through myelination? By the time they hit middle school, it's about halfway myelinated. The myelin has covered the middlemost part of the brain, the limbic system, the emotional epicenter of the brain, the risk reward, feel good, I want to try this new thing, excited, motivated part of the brain. The part of the brain that does not have myelin, that it's there, but it cannot send and receive signals quickly, is the prefrontal cortex. So they have it. They can make smart decisions, consequential, thoughtful, long-term decisions with their prefrontal cortex, but they're battling a limbic system that gets messages faster and sends messages faster, and it's an unfair fight. And that is why when we talk about the developing brain and how vulnerable kids are to making bad decisions, that's it. It's that the feel-good part of their brain in the middle is sending and receiving signals faster. And it's not all bad, right? You can study hard for a test, get an A on the test, feel amazing, and be motivated to study for the next test. Or you can shoplift. And that is where I turn it over to Vanessa to tell us what to do.
Okay, so it begs the question, like, why do we even bother? Why don't we just wait till they're 30 to have these conversations? Because they're a work in progress. But there is a point to having these conversations at the dinner table, on walking the dog, in the car. And the point is this: you are helping them build muscle memory. Their brains, if you think of their brains, right, they're like highways under construction. You have super highways, right? That's what's been myelinated. Things move super fast on those highways. You have bumpy dirt roads that take ages for information to pass through on those neurons. And then you have like wet cement, right? It's literally being laid down in the moment. And if you think of having these conversations with kids, like being able to put handprints in that wet cement and having an impact that will remain and last through time, that's why we have the conversations with kids about decision making. But we don't have an impact if we don't include them in the conversation. So if we turn to them and tell them exactly what they should do, they haven't used any of their problem solving, any of their strategizing. They haven't built any of the resilience of figuring it out for themselves. Instead, we want to elicit from them, how would you handle it? What would you say? What could you do in this situation? And sometimes they don't want to engage, right? You get the eye roll, you get the hood up, you get the back turned, and that's fine. And sometimes you just have to give them some information, because if they're still in the room, they can still hear you. And the last thing is, don't forget to explain the science to them. When we talk to kids, they love hearing about how their brains are maturing, what makes them special, what makes it challenging sometimes. It makes them feel less shame and less embarrassment about the times they mess up, because they realize, oh, I'm not a bad person. I'm just a work in progress. So we're going to end on a lovely topic and a challenging topic. And I'll start with the lovely topic, and Cara will move into the more challenging topic. So we've got mood swings, we've got decision making, and we've got crushes. And crushes can be romantic or platonic, but this age of puberty, the tween and teen years, is when crushes like really take root. They're beautiful, they're exciting, they're about deep human connection, about being seen by someone else or really truly seeing another person. And they're really, really a special part of growing up and laying the foundation for becoming an adult someday who can have a loving, meaningful relationship with another person. Except,
Oh, Vanessa always gives me The less fun slide. Except the reality is that today, the average age of first porn viewing is 12. And there's some data floating out there that that's an optimistic number, and it might be even younger than that. Why does that matter? Because phone or no phone, they're still exposed. They are on digital devices all day. And if they're not on their own, they might be on yours. And they're not looking for the porn, most of them. It's finding them. It's a click away. And the folks who are putting the porn out there, the free porn out there, are trying to get the kids' eyeballs on there because they want the early users so that they can cultivate future customers. And this porn that we're talking about, this free porn, it's nothing like the Playboy of 20 or 30 years ago. This is video, and it's not just video, it's video after video after video after video of often violent, misogynistic porn. It is kids watching sexual acts before they've ever had their first kiss. And so we have to talk about it, because at the same time that they're having this jumble of emotions and they think they like someone, on their phone are images that they simply cannot unsee. And if you don't have the conversation with them, someone else is having it, the pornographers. And it is time for all of us to just accept the reality and start being in conversation with our kids. So Vanessa, will you land us there? How do we do it?
Can you imagine if we were like, thank you so much, good night? We're not going to leave you there. We're going to give you some tools. And in the book, we have like a whole chapter about how do you talk about sex? How do you talk about hookup culture? How do you talk about porn? Because it's complex and it's ever changing. So how do you talk about it? First, to talk about porn, you have to talk about sex. And to talk about sex, you have to define sex. And we want to make sure when we talk about sex, we're inclusive. So there's not one kind of sex. There are many ways people choose to have sex. And over their lives, our kids may grow into people who choose to have different kinds of sex. And in order to keep themselves healthy and safe, they have to understand how they do that in different ways of having sex. So if you are more comfortable, you can start with the one that we were raised, the one definition, which is penis and vagina sex. You can start with something simple like, hey, we've never talked about this before, but one way people have sex is a person puts their penis inside another person's vagina. They have consent. They have permission to do it. It's fun. It should feel good. And that's one way people choose to have sex, at which point your kid will turn around and say, thank you so much, and leave the room. If you're asked about porn, right? So you're not initiating the conversation, laying the groundwork, but a kid comes to you, you want to understand where the question is coming from. So our favorite line, and Cara says this in this lovely, gentle voice, is, that's such an interesting question. What made you ask that? Because you want to gauge, were they exposed to porn? Was somebody talking about porn? Are they actually curious about sex because they saw like two dogs humping each other, right? Like there's a million reasons why a kid might ask. Find out what their starting point is before you begin to answer. And in every situation, in everything we've talked about tonight, and in every other topic you're going to deal with over this decade of puberty, you want to lead with curiosity and ditch the shame. So if your kid says to you, I was exposed to porn, if you flip out and blame them and tell them they're going to be disowned and their grandparents are never going to talk to them again, they're never going to come to you again with another question about this or something else. So even if you have like a little bit of vomit in the back of your throat that your kid has seen porn, you got to fake it till you make it. And again, say, wow, that's a big deal. Let's talk about it. I'm so glad that you came to me with this question. And the last thing we'll say before we take the Q&A is if you have a 10-year-old, it's time to start the conversation, because the recent data tells us that 15% of 10-year-olds have been exposed to porn. And you want to get there first before the porn does and lay the conversation out about what is consensual, loving, respectful, meaningful physical contact, because that's what you hope your kids will live up to one day, that they will have that kind of relationship and not the kind of relationship they see in porn.
So we're going to land here. We're excited to take questions. We do this all day, every day, across a lot of different verticals. So please come listen to our podcast. We would love to hear your thoughts on our book. Email us. We're on social media at Spilling the Puberty. And we welcome questions. That is our favorite way to generate our next round of content.
Well, thank you so much, Cara and Vanessa. You know, Bev and I have been advising parents for more years than we want to own up to. But your book is really special because you are so on the level, and parents, caregivers, educators, literally in every chapter, there's a section called How Do You Talk About It? And that's where you go when you need to know how to talk about it. And we vouch for the advice that they have in this book. And just the respect that you have for students, that's really core for us. It's respecting all the way down to babies, right? Consent starts early. I watched my son with his 2-year-old asking if he can put her socks on. Starts there, right? Anyway, thank you. Beautiful book. Let's see what we can get to, because we have lots of questions and all good questions. First of all, this is my question. Why did it feel so important to you both to write this book at this time? Was there like a call to action moment?
Yes, because this is a stage of life absolutely everyone goes through, and it doesn't deserve to be awkward. That's bananas. And so if we just break it down and understand what makes people uncomfortable and give people good information or starting points for conversation, we can ditch a lot of that cringiness and empower people to be healthier and safer and more connected.
That is a great answer. All right. In your book, this is so awkward. You go, as you know, far beyond hormones and the mood swings that we traditionally associate with puberty. Why did you two think it was so important to tackle things like mental health, eating disorders, and gender identity? Those talks are important to us.
So what we really wanted to do was build an entire universe that kids these days are living in, and adults are caring for them. If we only understand one corner of their lives, right, their physical maturation and potentially like stuff about sex, that is only a little bit of their reality. Things like gender identity are a huge topic for kids these days. Sexual orientation, conversations about sexual orientation have changed dramatically. Sexual mores around hookup culture have changed dramatically. The impact, we have a long chapter on youth sports over specialization, and the reality of youth sports deeply impacts kids' physical and emotional reality. So we really wanted to give caregivers like an entire picture of what their lives are like and feed that information into how adults can care for them. And I think it makes it feel more reassuring when it's not just like one big thing, but it's many different things. Having said that, we know we're in a mental health crisis. We're in a mental health emergency for tweens and teens. We are not mental health professionals. There are wonderful experts out there who do this work, people like Lisa DeMoore and Tina Payne Bryson. What we do in the book is we help people understand the vocabulary, and we help them understand what are the things they can do in their own homes. What are the basic ways to support the mental wellness of the kids in their lives? Things like getting enough sleep, things like getting enough exercise, things like having open communication in your household to at least support the mental wellness of kids, and to also figure out when you do need to get help.
So true. Thank you, Vanessa. Great answer. So, I love how you both talk about how the kids love science. I remember explaining to my daughter about 10 years ago when she was a teenager and the brain science was starting to come out, that brains take a long time to mature, and it may not be until she's in her 20s until it's fully mature. And she looked at me and said, "I'm so relieved." Like, it really makes them feel better to know that it's not their fault that some things are a struggle, right?
That's right.
I'll add to that that when we teach in the classroom and we explain mood swings, we start by asking kids, how many of you have either laughed hysterically for no reason, cried hysterically when it's not that sad? 100% of them put their hand up when we ask them how they like it. Do they want to feel that way? We've never met a kid who wants to feel that way. And when they understand that it's a result of these surging and falling hormones, they are relieved. They are truly, truly relieved. So the education does a lot to lift the burden of what the day-to-day existence of being a tween or a teen looks like.
That's so true. Oh boy. Okay. So people are really curious to know about how do you start these conversations if you have a kid who doesn't want to talk, as his parent says. How do you talk to a kid that thinks the conversations are awkward, doesn't want to talk? Good thing you named the book that. Do you table it and try it again later, or just stay in the moment and keep talking?
So we get this question all the time. So for the people here asking this question, you are not alone. This is a really, really common question. And it's really common that people in one home have different kinds of kids and different kids, willing or unwilling. There's certain things that you can control and certain things that are in the control of the kid. And we like to encourage people to give their kids a little bit of control. So, for instance, if you have a kid who's like, no, 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 I don't want to talk about it, stop talking about it, right? You can say to them, hey, you know what? I got to talk to you about this stuff because your health and safety depends on having some of this information. But I'm going to let you choose where we have this conversation. And I'm going to give you a choice. When this weekend do you want to have this conversation, right? You can say, we can go for a hike. We can go bowling. We can sit on the couch and stare at the ceiling. You get to choose. We can do it early in the morning. We can do late at night. But I'm going to have this conversation with you. And the other thing is, kids think, oh my God, it's going to be a 5-hour conversation and my parent is going to back up the dump truck and I'm going to be swallowed whole by all this awkward information. You can say to them, I need 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes. We're going to talk about one thing. We're going to talk about porn. We're going to talk about friendship. We're going to talk about love. You pick the topic that seems easiest to you or your kid. 5 minutes, set a timer. If you need to set a timer like you did when they were little, have the conversation and say, okay, you can go. Give them some control, give them some previewing, let them know it's not going to go on and on forever, and they get a say in some of the circumstance.
And I'll just add that for those of you who have a child who just really clams up, they shut the door, they really don't want to engage. What I did, because I happen to have one of those kids, was I would sit on the other side of the door and I would say, I'm on the other side of the door and I just want to check in with you. And I have one question, or I want to hear about your day, and if there's an issue or concern, and I would say, I'm just going to hang out here and let me know if you want to talk. And not the first time and not the second time, but very quickly, that was when we had some of our best early conversations, because talk about no eye contact, no vulnerability. For a kid who does not want to engage, having a closed door between you is very, very safe. And what happens is over time, that door opens because what you've shown is you're there. You're on the other side of the door.
I really like that, Cara. You know, we've advised parents over the years to keep saying, I'm here if you want to talk. I'm here if you want to talk. People think they say that once and it's enough. You got to keep saying it, right? Because you never know. I haven't heard that sitting outside the door, though. I kind of like that one. All right, we don't have a lot of time left, but I would be remiss if I did not at least touch on this subject. Social media, body gender, appearance. Yay, nay. What do you two ladies say?
So,
Do you want to start, Vanessa?
yeah, I'll start and just say, the data is not, there's a correlation between time spent on social media, more time spent on social media, poorer body image, lower self-esteem, higher rates of anxiety or depression. We do not know if it's causal or corollary. We actually just interviewed Dr. Michael Rich from the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's. And he was like, it doesn't really matter if it's causal or corollary. It matters that we create healthy, tech hygiene for our kids as they grow and change. And we make sure they're doing all the things they need to be doing to keep themselves well. Are they exercising? Are they eating well? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they socializing in person and not just online? Are they building connection with the trusted adults in their lives across over a meal or on a walk, right? So his encouragement is to build a baseline. Our feeling is it does impact kids. It can't help but impact kids, but we are not powerless. It's not like the horse has fled the barn and there's nothing we can do. There are all sorts of expectations and limits that we can put in place for our kids to keep them healthy. Cara, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we would be remiss if we didn't add, there are huge positives to social media that have been documented over and over. And look no further than the LGBTQ plus community, who find so much comfort and community and connection through social media groups. So we can't just toss it all out and dismiss social media as a catastrophe. It is not. It is a very complicated combination of a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. One thing that Vanessa and I recommend that all adults do is you get into their social media space with them. Your algorithm is serving you different social media than their algorithm is serving them. So just being on a similar platform does not tell you what their experience is. Go look at their TikTok feed and see what it shows, and then get in a conversation about it. Again, no shame, no judgment. That's the only rule going into it. And at some point, you may have to set some limits. At some point, you may see some behaviors and you say, I'm connecting some dots and I'm the parent and I have to step in here and set some limits. But that too is a conversation. And it's a conversation that will evolve over time. Social media is not going away. It's just not.
Charlene, I just see a question in the Q&A that I just want to about school programming and sex ed. And I just want to say, I mean, this is not why we're here, but we actually just launched a health and sex ed curriculum, and it's 4th through 8th grade. And it's an incredible resource, and it's online, and it's ready-made decks for teachers with all sorts of resources and notes behind backing it up. So if your kid is in a school and they are not getting the sex ed or health ed that you hoped, you can check us out at lessawkward.com, and we're happy to be in touch about what's happening in your kid's school.
Thank you, Vanessa. We have a few great organizations here like Health Connected. You may have heard of them. Yeah,
Wonderful.
really good, but not everybody has that. And university schools don't offer it. So parents, you have power. Write to your administrators and say, look, I heard this great talk. I want to know what you're doing. What are we doing? Right?
That's right.
Quickly, last thing, I just want to ask this because you two just strike me as people who would answer it. After everything you've researched and learned and parented, what gives you hope?
Oh, well, they are joyful. They do. The kids do. There's nothing better than hanging out with a group of tweens or teens. There's just like, so every single one of them, they are, whether they are in a joyful moment or they're struggling, these kids are incredible seeds that are growing into unbelievable humans, all with their own strengths. I mean, I know Vanessa's going to give a similar answer. We love the audience, our primary audience that we serve. We love these kids.
I love that answer. You know, our tagline is because parenting is a growth opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, I learned so much about myself. I am a better human being for having cared for these kids. And listen, just when you're in a stage that feels really hard and really challenging, and you're like, I stink at this part of parenting, then they enter a new stage and they're so interesting and so funny and so engaging. And they give you a lot of insight into yourself. So just enjoy it. Don't fear it. Laugh with them, cry with them. They are so incredible. And we hope that everybody who came tonight feels more empowered, more optimistic, more confident to go back into caring for their kids, probably sitting in the other room, and really go for it in a new way. And we hope it helps make a difference.
Oh, we hope so. Thank you to you, Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett. Look at all of those hearts. Isn't this great? for a really wonderful and empowering book. That's what we do, provide the education skills and strategies parents need to just do this job a little bit better. You know your kids. So thank you to you ladies. What a wonderful presentation tonight. Thank you, everybody. Look at those hearts. Take care, everyone. Hope to see you again soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.